Hi, this is Veruschka Normandeau of Gypsy Rose Chariot, doing my Salt of the Earth interviews here on the Big Island of Hawaii. And I'm excited to get to chat with people I'm really inspired by, who I adore, who I feel like are really representing authentic heart courage of what they followed in their life. And today I'm excited to speak to my dear friend and self-compassion expert, Kristin Neff. She's a doctor of psychology and associate professor at the University of Austin in Texas. Welcome, Kristin. Thanks so much for chatting with me today. Please tell me what are all the wonderful things you get to spend your time doing?
Well, I really do have a blessed life in the sense that my work is doing what I love to do. So I am a professor, so I teach a couple courses at UT Austin. So 3 out of the 4 courses I teach a year are on mindfulness and self-compassion. So I actually teach my undergraduate and graduate students not only theory and research about the topics, but I have them all meditate. For the last half of the class is completely experiential, which is just great fun. And then in addition to teaching, and I do research on self-compassion, and the other probably the biggest place I spend my time is teaching self-compassion and workshops. And I've also developed an 8-week protocol intervention to teach people self-compassion, and that's gone global. We teach it all over the world now. So I teach that, and I also teach other people to teach the program. So my life is pretty much all self-compassion all the time, which is not a bad place to be. Yeah.
So since you did discover for yourself self-compassion as a personal coping and healing modality or necessity, what's changed for you? Is it still, how has the practice for yourself evolved?
Yeah, I mean, it's still for me primarily a personal practice before I teach anyone else about it or do any research on it. I suppose the way it's evolved is just it's become more habitual now. It's my first instinct whenever there's any sort of suffering present. My first instinct is to, okay, what do I need right now? I need to give myself some kindness and support. So I'll do that almost immediately. And before it was just a little more effort. I had to remember it a little bit more. But I would say that my practice itself hasn't really changed. It's just become easier and more integrated into my life, I suppose, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. Now, on a whole other topic, I don't know how much we'll get into it. You are also a mother of an autistic child, Rowan. As I understand, he is on the scale of high functioning. How have you been able to share self-compassion with him just by in the way you speak with him, or how does that translate?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have. It's not what I'd envisioned about me having these long talks with my child, about self-compassion at a more theoretical level. But he certainly, I think, picks it up. I do some modeling, helping him when he's upset, take deep breaths, put his hands on his heart, etc. And I think he gets a lot of his self-compassion through me, right? So he'll say, he'll come to me for compassion and sympathy or support. So even though through the vehicle is me, he'll initiate it. So he's still giving himself what he needs. It's certainly the case that he's so easy now. I mean, I really don't have many difficult situations now, believe it or not. But when he was younger, when he was difficult, I would give myself a lot of self-compassion, and that's really what enabled me to keep my heart open to him. So, it's definitely impacted our relationship hugely. And I think he's picked it up more implicitly, but I'd be lying if I thought it yet. I mean, he knows what self-compassion is, but I don't think he thinks about it much.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the rawness in action that he knows the source.
Yeah, and very unconditionally loving to him. So he's not self-critical, although the autism means he's a very rigid thinker. So if he makes a mistake or does something wrong, it's terrible for him. It's like almost very hard for him to bear it. So, I try in those moments to help him remember common humanity, and it's part of life to make mistakes, but it's very physiological level, very difficult for him. So I just try to support him as best I can. Yeah.
Wow. So is that along the lines of just feeling like he failed in that moment, or frustration?
I mean, and autism in many ways is an anxiety disorder, and it's very anxiety producing to realize that you can make mistakes, unintentional mistakes especially. And I think it makes him feel out of control when he recognizes it. And also, though he does have a self-concept, it's a little more simple. I also studied self-concept development for my PhD, and it's probably a little more the self-concept of maybe someone who's 9 or 10 as opposed to someone who's 14, in the sense that it tends to be black or white. In the moment, I'm a good person or I'm a bad person. He hasn't really yet developed the kind of complex thinking that you start seeing develop in adolescence. Well, in some ways, I've got strengths, and other areas I have weaknesses, and the ability to hold the multiplicity of our self-concept together at one time. It's a little hard for him. So in the moment, if he feels bad, he's all bad, which is difficult to say. We actually all do it sometimes in those difficult moments. We forget our mature self-concept, and in that moment, we are just all bad. But for him, that's a little more pervasive. So, but we try to put him in a few situations where he's going to feel that. We give him lots of unconditional support. He's a pretty healthy kid. Yeah.
Beautiful. I can see him now. So since I've known you, you've been an avid Buddhist and have always participated in Vipassanas, and that was always like your go-to remedy, which I couldn't imagine. I would not be drawn to that. So how is that showing up in your life? Is it still part of your life, or has there been a natural merging with the self-compassion and the mindfulness meditation? Can you speak about how the two have either complement each other, or how did that journey unfold for you?
Yeah, so one of the things that definitely shifted as I've gone out and taught more workshops around the world is that I've had a lot less time for me to go on my own personal retreats. I used to go on 3 or 4 a year, week-long retreats. And I didn't go on anything for about 2.5 years. And then I finally, over Christmas, went on a week-long retreat with my boyfriend, which was very lovely. But it had been a while. So I'm trying to make a commitment to at least go on one retreat a year, because it's very important to me. There's a point of clarity and balance you get on retreat that you can't really get in any other context. So even though it's true when I go out and I do workshops, I am guiding meditation, and I'm kind of embodying self-compassion. So it's still related to my ultimate goals. It's not like I'm, doing something that's totally disconnected from that side of myself, but it's not the same. So hopefully as time goes on, I'll be able to do more personal retreat practice again. But it has been a conscious choice that I can only be away from Rowan for so long. And also my teaching schedule only allows me to be away so much. So I prioritize teaching other people self-compassion for now. So.
And has the self-compassion also come into play during these meditation retreats where, you're dealing with sitting and observing the mind and...
Oh, yeah, but that's always been there. I mean, that's how I really discovered self-compassion and meditation at the same time. So I've been lucky in that the two have always been intertwined for me. Some people learn mindfulness meditation, and if they aren't lucky enough to have a teacher who talks explicitly about self-compassion, it can sometimes be a little dry, too focused just on the awareness, not focused enough on generating the sense of kind of loving, connected presence, which is really part of meditation practice. But some teachers emphasize that more than others. So I was lucky. I always had that from the beginning. So it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So do you do you see the things that are happening in your life right now where you do feel so fortunate and lucky, and how it's all supporting each other? Do you feel like there is any comparison to childhood memories of things that you thought you would do when you grew up, or things you wanted to be? Have you seen or noticed any connections?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think for some reason I always imagined myself as a professor. I always kind of thought that that would be a good role for me. So that's come true. I was a very spiritual little kid as well. So I guess the fact that I've been able to center my life around my spirituality, you might say, has also come true. Yeah, so it's not a million miles away from what I envisioned, although I didn't have a very clear vision of what I was going to do when I was little, but kind of along these lines, it seems like it's worked out. Yeah.
Beautiful. I think it's so interesting when things seem to pop up these days where you're like, I can't believe that this is happening. I had this little wish one time when I was 4, and now it's unfolding in this way, in a way I could never imagine.
Yeah.
So you have had the chance to travel around the world and meet shamans of all different indigenous cultures since you did the horse boy with your ex-husband, Rupert Isaacson. And you all went around the world for 3 years in a row, seeing different Bushmen, the Aborigines, Mongolia. And I remember you talking back then after some of the screenings about kind of holding a skeptical role, or I don't know how else I would describe it. How is what has your relationship changed to that, or have you guys been in touch with any other indigenous healers since that time?
Not since the last healing, which was with a Navajo healer. I haven't personally, or Rowan hasn't. I'd say I'm still the same, but someone once described me as an open-minded skeptic. And that's really how I feel. I'm not skeptical in the sense that I don't know if I believe this stuff, but I'm not a believer in the sense that I'm like, I know this is absolutely true. I'm just kind of in a space of not knowing it. I do know that something happened, that something does happen in these situations. And it's funny, I'm really not that interested in whether or not it's true or whatever that even means, because it feels to me like the second you put these types of concepts on it and you try to hold it, make it, reify it through some sort of, well, maybe it's the such and such energy or this or that. It almost feels like it's not that relevant, because what you're doing, it's an experience that's outside those types of ways of thinking about what reality is. So I'm personally quite happy to experience it, be totally open to it, and just say, I don't know what the reality is, but something happened. I mean, for me, that's a really comfortable place to be in. I know for some people, they're more interested in kind of, is this scientifically true or not? So I don't know. And it's for whatever reason, I'm not that interested, but I will say that something happens for sure. I would be stupid if I didn't believe my own experience. That would not be scientific to say, well, because I can't explain it, nothing happened. Couldn't have happened, So
yeah, you were there. You were there and you witnessed. It was experiential things. Yeah. And at the same time, I mean, are you in a position where you would encourage other parents seeking some assistance in that way?
I probably wouldn't encourage them. I think it's one of those things where if it draws you, go for it. But I wouldn't have it out there as like the one, I'll try chelation and I'll try gluten-free diet and I'll try shamanism. And I wouldn't really encourage it that way. It's one thing to try for autism. It does seem that certain people's lives, that these threads just kind of start weaving themselves into their lives. And I think if that's you, then it's worthwhile following those threads and seeing where they lead. But no, I wouldn't, from my point of view, actively encourage it unless it's something that draws you, or your life kind of evolves so that it's leading you that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great place to be. So, knowing what you know and being as experienced and knowledgeable as you are, how do you find support for yourself? Like, who are your mentors and muses? Do you have them? Do you yearn for them? How has your relationship been?
Well, I'm lucky because the people who I work with the Mindful Self-Compassion program, so the man who co-created the program with me, Chris Germer, and just a lot of the teachers I'm very close to, they're people I respect tremendously, people with similar value system, quite experienced teachers. Most of them are therapists, actually, meditation teachers. So I'm lucky in that when I go away to work, if I go do a workshop, for instance, I'm surrounded by people who I really respect and who I care for a lot and trust their opinion. So I think since I stopped going on retreat so much, I have less of a relationship with any particular teacher, like Dharma teacher at this point. Maybe that will come back in. It's kind of, it's kind of weird, Veruschka, is like, I just taught at Spirit Rock, and it was a strange role reversal, because I'm used to being in the audience, and here I was teaching. So there's a strange way in which that boundary is dissolving between being a student and a teacher and a peer, and it's just kind of, just kind of me doing my thing and them doing their thing and my colleagues doing their thing, and it's a little more, a little less defined, the roles, I would say.
And it sounds like an absolute natural progression. It sounds like it's been an effortless progression of your true nature, of that what you put your energy and focus into. You suddenly become an expert and a master of that information.
I mean, I've certainly probably spent, I don't know, more time, but I spent a lot of time thinking about researching and talking and teaching about self-compassion. So I certainly feel a level of mastery with it, comfort with it from all the years of experience. It's good to feel that.
Yeah.
If someone asks me a question, I feel pretty confident that I can give some sort of answer, or that I also know enough to know when I can say, we don't know yet. And there's actually a lot of unexplored territory as well. But, I know enough to where I don't feel uncomfortable saying that. No, if that makes sense. So it's good.
So what are you afraid of right now? What are some of your fears you come up against, either in your career or your personal life? Like, what are some of your edges right now?
Well, one of the things, it's not so much a fear, but one of the things that I'm really aware of and have to be really disciplined about and be mindful of is one of the things that happens, sadly, even in these types of more spiritual scientific realms, is they really like to form camps. Self-compassion is better than mindfulness, or mindfulness-based stress reduction is flawed because it doesn't explicitly include self-compassion, or we don't need self-compassion. And, there's someone else who teaches self-compassion called Paul Gilbert, and he has adherents who might have things to say about me. And I have to be so careful not to get involved in that camp mentality. And kind of as a leader, I've even had talks with other people who are kind of founders of whatever their particular tradition is, that we really need to be proactive and just say, we aren't going there. We're all on the same team. We're all reaching toward the same goal. We have different methodologies for getting there that are going to work differently for different people. But it's, I guess really it's just ego, really being aware that it's natural for the ego to want to identify with things. And because I'm so well known now, also one of the things that happens with that success is that people I don't know if target sounds too strong a word, but yeah, you become a target, that some graduate student's going to want to write their dissertation about some way that you're wrong or whatever it is. That's just natural. So holding it and owning it without getting defensive or getting your ego stuck in it is something this is a challenge. I think I'm navigating it okay, but it's something that needs a bit of effort for sure. And I'll just say that some very well-known people haven't been so good at that, and I'm really wanting not to be like them. I won't name names, but it's kind of interesting. People you think should know better, they can get very ego involved, and I don't want to be like that. It doesn't help anybody,
Yeah. Like, you have such a grounded, like, genuine, sweet, caring energy about you. How has it been showing up for you in that kind of culture to be a woman now? And like, this is kind of maybe a two-part question. Like, what is your personal relationship perhaps with the divine feminine and being like filling the shoes that you're filling, and how you're having to mix with that in business and in your field? So do you come up against any discrimination or some of what you were just talking about of having to kind of prove yourself a little more? Or?
It's hard to say if it's discrimination or not. I do notice that the people whose egos get very defensive tend to be men. Maybe just because there's more men leaders in the field just by, history. But I have noticed that some people feel that gender is playing a role. I don't know if I agree with that or not. I'm not sure. I think you do have to prove yourself a little more, maybe aggressively if you're a female, while still trying to keep true to your nature. But I also have two sides to me, right? I'm very, I can embody self-compassion and compassion for others. It's a part of my nature. But I can also be aggressive. I've got this other side to me that can come out in certain situations that's quite masculine. And I think maybe that's not a bad thing that, put it this way, I'm not scared of anyone, which gives me a courage to be able to go into any forum and feel that I can stand up for my point of view. But yeah, it is interesting, the masculine and feminine thing. I think even in general, mindfulness, the wisdom path is a little more masculine. I said, we don't want to be really black and white, but the compassion, the love is a little more feminine. And I think that's why mindfulness has had a much bigger reach so far, because it's less button pushing. Men aren't as threatened by the idea of mindfulness. Oh, that's just awareness training. Then compassion, that's the heart. And so I think there is a little resistance because it is a feminine energy, I think, compassion and self-compassion. If you want to call it the divine feminine, you can. It's not really, for me, I don't, sometimes I frame it that way. It's not my typical way of framing things. Sometimes I do, but I think it's definitely true that this energy of compassion, you might say, is the energy of that feminine embodiment of the ideal, loving, accepting, caring, nurturing figure, which is female. So I think, I think it's been a little barrier, but I think with the science backing it up, the resistance is fading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you've got your experience lets you navigate those maybe outdated kinds of ways of being. But it's so fortunate that you are in a niche of your own, that you can hold your own in that. So what are you motivated by?
What am I motivated by? Well, I'm absolutely an evangelist. I make a joke of that in my TED Talk, but I am, in the sense that I want the idea of self-compassion to reach as many people as possible. And what I want, after getting this program really stable and the nonprofit center stabilized, and we have 5 staff members now. It's absolutely crazy. but I want to reach people in ways that don't require meditation, that are shorter, that are briefer. In other words, people who are drawn to meditation or drawn to more alternative ways to being, in a way, they're already halfway there, just open-minded enough and willing to do something like trying to meditate or search inside themselves, and they can find, a lot of answers there. But there's a lot of people I think who can be helped who are just never going to meditate. They're never going to read a self-help book, really. They just aren't naturally drawn that way, and yet they're very hard on themselves. And if they get the message, even at a more surface level, that being a kinder, more supportive, more friendly to themselves, they can cause themselves, prevent a lot of unnecessary suffering. So I'm really interested in getting this out there. So for instance, the UT men's basketball team just came to me last week, and we're going to be teaching the UT men's basketball team self-compassion. And the engineering department came to me in a similar situation. I'm really interested in getting this out there to like the masses, to really make a cultural shift, because right now the culture does not support the idea of self-compassion. It's actually really suspicious of self-compassion. Mm-hmm. A culture shift so that the idea is more accepted and people start to think, well, actually, maybe if I'm a friend to myself as opposed to an inner enemy, I'll have better coping skills. That really excites me, to reach people who aren't the type of people who would ever come to one of my workshops,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that is amazing with the team at UT. So that kind of answers my next question, which would be what kind of shift do we need to make as an individual and for the collective? And that sounds like what people are up against. I've heard you say before, not to confuse self-compassion with like self-pity or being selfish. Do you want to share more about exposing why people are resisting the concept of self-compassion?
Yeah, I mean, there are very common barriers, and the same ones always come up. Every single place I talk, I say, what are your doubts or misgivings? And the same 5 or 6 always come up. And that's that it's selfish, right? That it's self-indulgent, that it's going to undermine your motivation, that it's weak, right? And that it's self-pity. And there's probably a couple others, but those are the basic ones. And the really great thing now is there's research on every single one of these points, basically showing that just the opposite is true, right? So, and once you kind of talk to people about it and allow them to question, is it true, my assumptions about this? Does this really make sense? And then plus with a little research showing that actually research shows just the opposite. People soften a little bit. They become more willing to maybe explore this for themselves. They aren't just defended against it. But so whenever I talk about self-compassion, I always talk about these misconceptions, really, right? People just don't understand what self-compassion is. So, for instance, thinking that it's self-pity. Well, self-criticism is one of the absolute most self-focused states you can possibly be in. Whereas if you're just kind of accepting of the fact that you're a human being like everyone else, you aren't saying that, woe is me, my life is worse than yours. You're just saying that my life, too, is difficult, and it actually connects you more, the shared human experience, as opposed to isolating you. Mm-hmm. And again, that makes sense once you think about it. Mm-hmm. But in our culture, we don't really have a place for that concept. So it's changing, though. It is starting to change. Yeah.
I know it seems so simple, and yet it's such conditioning. Such conditioning and programming. I think you have a YouTube out there, a talk on depression, and I don't know how to talk about this, but it seems like a lot of intense energies in the world right now. On the personal level, if you follow astrology or believe in astrology, it's kind of like amazing heights and devastating lows happening faster and faster and faster. In the field of people I know, especially women who are empathetic and feeling, it's been like almost paralyzing, the I don't know, there's like senses of not being good enough, being ashamed of yourself, having unbearable guilt, and they're kind of storyless. They're like paralyzing feelings in the body. And And then the heights are kind of like, I'm free, I can do anything, or these innovative ideas that, or things that were the norm, but you finally actually see the truth of the norm, and you see the beauty in it. So I don't know if this resonates with you at all, how just the energies, for lack of a better word, are lately. What can you suggest to people? Like, what would be a practical application of someone really, when like one moment you're just like on fire and have all these new visions, and the next moment you can't do the dishes?
Yeah.
Is there any advice you can give to slow that moment down?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I'm kind of a one-trick pony, but what the beauty of self-compassion is, it's so good for situations like that. You mentioned being empathetic with others who may be suffering a lot or extremely depressed or having intense negative energy. That's why it's so, especially for empathetic people, it's really important to cultivate self-compassion, because when you come in contact with another suffering, you're suffering too. Quite literally, your brain, the pain centers of your brain are being activated, because as human beings, that's what empathy is. Our brains mirror the emotions of others. That's the way we're wired. So unless you kind of consciously, in the presence of being impacted by others' suffering, unless you consciously hold your own suffering and realize, wow, this is hard for me too, and I need some care, and I need some support and tenderness, that's the only way you can really hold the other person's suffering without burning out. Otherwise, it will just completely drain you, right? So it's very important, as I said, especially for empathetic people, to focus explicitly on themselves. As a matter of fact, I say you should focus more on yourself when your own empathetic distress is high and you're really feeling overwhelmed by someone else's suffering, but 90% of your energy on yourself until you feel stabilized enough to therefore give to the other person, because you aren't going to be help to anyone if you are burnt out and overwhelmed, which many of us are, especially women. This is especially a pattern for women. They're less self-compassionate than men are, but a lot more compassionate to others. So there's an imbalance in women that I think needs to be intentionally corrected. But also, with one's own highs and lows, right? Just the whole thing needs to be held with this sense of kindness and friendliness and support, and the perspective of common humanity, that this is part of life. These highs are part of life. These lows are part of life. Nothing's abnormal when you're really low. This is part of the package we signed up for. No one signed up for the everything's going to go wonderfully and smooth and easy till the day I die plan, right? Show me that contract. It doesn't exist. And yet we act as if something has gone terribly wrong when we have these ups and downs. So really holding it all in bigger perspective. I think not only does it help you cope with the ups and downs, but I think it actually changes the intensity itself, because we don't get so locked in. The sense of self doesn't get so locked in either into the intense highs or intense lows. So.
Well, could you give an example of some self-talk when one is suddenly in the paralysis? Like what could be some of the self-talk? And also, I'm thinking that if you're new to this whole concept, it seems like you would also have to learn an entirely new way to communicate with your family or with your spouse or with the people you work with. So one, do you have suggestion like what that self-talk would look like when you're really hitting a wall? And B, how you would communicate like, hey, I'm feeling like, maybe you have some go-to books or suggestions on that.
Well, I mean, kind of the suggestion in general I give is go to where the pain is. So for instance, you may be feeling paralyzed and stuck. So often the tendency is to want to go to the heart of that, what's deep down the root? Is it deep down because I hate myself, or is it deep down because I'm unfulfilled in this way? And try to unravel it from the inside. I will say start from the outside. In other words, what you're experiencing is the pain of being stuck. So it's so hard to feel stuck, I feel so paralyzed. I feel so, gosh, kind of sympathy. It's so hard to feel stuck. But you know, a lot of people feel stuck. This is really part of the human experience, to feel stuck. We all feel stuck sometimes. Okay, how can I support myself through the experience of being stuck? So in other words, you know, just kind of whatever the outward manifestation of the pain is in the moment, start there, and then it'll all kind of start to soften or loosen. But you don't have to, you know, the process of self-compassion is the same whether or not you're applying it to the frustration of not being able to be self-compassionate, or whether you're talking about some deep-seated, you know, memories of shame caused by your childhood. It's really all the same flavor of self-compassion. And, you know, you don't want to, you don't want to overlook the opportunities for practice that come even with things like feeling frustrated because you can't practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's the place, that's where you really have to start, is where the pain right now is manifesting at the kind of the outer level of it. And then it just kind of, you can go deeper and everything, but don't try to fix things too much. Allow yourself to be a slow learner, piece by piece, you know, let it just evolve naturally, and then it will go more easily. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And
in terms of other people, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's a choice how much you want to talk to other people about it. It depends the people in your life, whether or not they would understand. If you don't think you're going to get a receptive audience, maybe you don't want to try to talk to them about your self-compassion journey. What's really important is the way you talk to yourself changes. And then what typically happens is, as you change your mind state and you become a little calmer, feel a little more safe, a little less negative, that other people pick up on that and they'll naturally respond to your changed mindset, right? So I think whether or not you talk explicitly about what you're trying to do just really depends on the relationship you have. Some is probably a good idea, some is probably not, you know?
But do you have any experience with any particular style of communication, like compassionate communication, or anything in particular that you recommend to people if they're...
Well, gosh, I mean, in terms of us I mean, I'm a real fan of nonviolent communication, right? Marsha Rosenberg's work. I think that's really the most evolved communication system that explicitly incorporates both self-compassion and compassion for others in the whole technique. So, yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend nonviolent communication as a way of dealing with this. Yeah, for sure. I feel like that's an area where I still have so much to learn, you know. I'm very good talking to myself, but when I get triggered and talking to someone else, that's when it can be a lot more difficult, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole slowing down aspect and really getting clear on what your need is and what your want is, you know, because your want is not necessarily the same as your need. And it's something to practice. Yeah. It takes a long time. So what lights you up right now? What's rewarding to you?
I mean, my whole life is rewarding, you know. I'm so lucky because, you know, I probably get 3, 4, sometimes more emails a day, people thanking me for my work and how it's changed their life. Imagine, like, wow, if I were to die tomorrow, I would feel like okay with what I feel like satisfied with what I've contributed. Just the ability to be able to impact people's lives in a positive way is just amazingly fulfilling, you know. And the fact that when I go teach my classes or I teach a workshop, or that's really that's what I do day to day, is I, you know, help people find this inner support. Then they aren't being directly supported by me. I'm just pointing the way for them to be able to support themselves, which is so beautiful because then they have this resource inside of them. So, yeah, that really is wonderful. And like I said, the fact that this intervention program is really gaining steam, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be huge, to be quite honest. I think there'll be thousands of people all around the world teaching the program. We've already trained 600 teachers. And including in China. China's on fire with this, so they'll probably be the biggest teachers of this program at some point.
That's interesting. So you just said intervention. What's that?
That's the 8-week mindful self-compassion program I've developed, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of a formal program where we've got a protocol, it's kind of set, what exercises a teacher does every class is 8 weeks, 2.5 hours every week. It's empirically supported. We've got research supporting its efficacy. And that's great because that other people can go and teach, right? It doesn't require me. We've created the program. If they train to teach the program, they can go out in their own communities and teach self-compassion. So that's hugely exciting. And then, like I say, I'm really interested in doing the kind of smaller dose versions to reach larger numbers of people and kind of see where, how that goes. It's kind of more uncharted territory. How much of a dose do people need to get some sort of impact?
Is there anything you're offering online that's accessible to people right now?
So right now, I'm not offering anything online, but I've got a phone meeting with Sounds True, and they want to offer an online program with Chris Germer and I, and they're the perfect home. I mean, they have a program with Jack Cornfield and Tara Brock, and they're all about self-acceptance. So that will probably happen. Now, the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion does offer an online version of our Mindful Self-Compassion program, but I don't teach that. Basically my time is so limited. I don't do as much of the day-to-day teaching as I used to. But
are you still planning to do any workshops at Esalen in California?
Yes, we do that every year. So it's going to be in December this year. Then I'm also doing something with a group, Shauna Shapiro, Dan Siegel, and Rick Hansen, which will be a lot of fun this September. So Esalen, I love Esalen. It's the best. So yeah. I still do longer workshops, but I don't really have time to teach like a whole 8-week program.
Oh yeah. So if you had all the money in the world right now, what would you do with it?
All the money? Everyone's money?
Unlimited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's obviously a big question. I could get into like solve global warming and all that, but just in terms of relevant to what I do, one of the things I would like to do is, right now it's kind of a privilege to be able to learn self-compassion. It costs money. The courses aren't cheap because people's time, the teacher's time is expensive. We do offer some scholarships, but I'd really like to be able to offer a lot more to make this much more widely available at much more affordable prices to a lot of people who wouldn't normally have access to it. But I think that will happen now that we have the nonprofit. We just need an angel donor. It may happen.
It may happen. Well, do please share about this next vision that you are working on is the nonprofit for mindful self-compassion.
Yeah. So we just started that this year. Well, 2015. It feels like this year, but very recently. So and we've got an executive director, and we've got, like I say, 3 staff people who work under the executive director, and we're translating our website into like 6 different languages, and are really trying to make it truly international. So it's a big project. But luckily, I've worked with an amazing team of people. And so it kind of has legs of its own. The program does itself have legs of its own. So it's nice. If you just teach people the basics of how to teach it, they need to get experience with it. But the program has legs, and that's really exciting to know that this is something that's being brought out into local communities all over the world. Yeah, but right now, at this point, it's mainly Chris Germer and I funding it, paying the staff, doing the website. So hopefully it will become self-supporting at some point, but, it's a good cause. So.
Absolutely. So how are you active in the autism community right now? Is there any bridge, or does it just kind of all go under the same umbrella of self-compassion? Is there any distinction for you right now?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm not that involved, like Horseboy Foundation, which Rupert runs next door. So I fund it. I give the money. And I'm around, but I just, I'm not involved on a day-to-day basis with autism families or helping with that foundation, working with the families. So I'm kind of a little on the periphery, but I'm certainly a supporter and intimately involved in many ways, but not in the day-to-day running of things. Yeah, so it's interesting. It hasn't worked out for whatever reason. I've offered, even like I called the Autism Society of America and said, "Hey, listen, I'll give you a free workshop," and they never took me up on it. They're kind of not clued into my work somehow. So maybe that will happen at some point, because I do, I like to talk to autism parents about these issues. But it hasn't really been a strong focus yet. I'm sure it will at some point.
It's always so interesting what we think, would help, and then what actually is desired and what gets put into action is sometimes two different things, and then they end up kind of connecting, but not what we necessarily think.
So I'm not, because Rupert is so proactive, so the fact that we've been able to keep ourselves as a family, even though we split up and live next door to each other, and we're part of the same community. And he's so proactive with working with the autism and the whole issue that I have the luxury, which a lot of women don't, especially autism parents, but I have the luxury of kind of playing more the role of the person, almost not on the sidelines, but you know what I mean? I don't have to do it all myself, because Rupert does so much of it, which I'm very, very thankful for. Mm-hmm. Usually it's up to the mother, and the father just goes to work.
Yeah. So. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, successful co-parenting and running two organizations like that. I mean, you guys are miracle workers. It's so effortless for you all. It seems that way. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I mean, if I'm not going to remember for self-compassion, I don't know what I'm going to remember for. If I'm not a pony, I mean, what else are they going to write on my tombstone? She believed in self-compassion and taught it to the world, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, it's nice, because I was just in the right place at the right time. I didn't invent the idea of self-compassion, clearly, and it's a construct that's been, well, certainly in Buddhism, but even in psychology. But because I was the first one to kind of operationally define and measure it, I was able to create a niche for myself early on that just, allows me to be linked to the concept in a very powerful way, which is why I need to be careful not to be ego involved. Because I tell you, that can also get sticky, right? I miss self-compassion, and that's dangerous too. But nonetheless, it's nice to have made my mark in the world, and I've already done it. If I were to die tomorrow, that mark will have already been made, which is great. And I just hope that it'll be deeper and more powerful the longer I live, So.
Well, I mean, along those lines, you've said that Brene Brown, she quotes you, and you're a mentor to her. So when you see authors or speakers like herself, do you ever have that, well, I said that, or people...
Listen, I thought, well, why
is she making the money while she's quoting me?
Why don't you introduce me to your friend Oprah, Brene? No, it's funny, but she's been very good to me, and we're going to start doing a bit of online teaching together, and I'm going to start. She's having me teach a workshop to her facilitators of her program, so I think there will be more collaboration there. So. Yeah. So I mean, I have those thoughts occasionally, but not really.
It's hard to make that proprietary.
Oh yeah, I mean, the more people that talk about self-compassion, the better. I do get a little bit, if someone doesn't mention me, so that's where the ego comes in. So it's like, okay, there's my ego. Okay, wanting to be mentioned, but
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's exciting, even from my perspective of having such a radical change with emotional freedom technique entering my life. And the bottom line in that is self-acceptance and self-love. You know, I love and accept myself, even though I have this anger. And now it's like,
I thought there was some research came out on emotional freedom technique. I thought someone told me that. I think there may be.
no, it's all, I mean, now it's all over the place. It's, you know, Wayne Dyer, what's your
research? I think there is one research study that came out. I'll look it up for you, but I think it's got getting some more scientific credibility, put it that way.
Popularity. Yeah, definitely. I mean, self-love is, you know, many people are teaching workshops or recommending it. And it's funny not to be like, oh, that's the newest rage, when it's wonderful, you know. There's power in numbers, that people are getting this wave of realizations of these subtleties, you know, the nuance of egotism versus self-care, like actual self-care.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about emotional freedom technique is the tapping on the meridians. And we know acupuncture has empirical support. So I think there's no doubt that it probably will be empirically supported. Maybe it is already. Like I said, I heard some rumors about a study. But I really believe in bringing the body in to acts of self-compassion or self-love and self-acceptance, because there's the mental component and the emotional component, but there's also just the straight old physiological component. I think any technique that combines physiologically, you know, how to prepare your body for this, I think it makes so much sense to me. Yeah. So,
yeah. Well, I thank you so much for having a little chat with me. I'm so happy for you and this work, and I'll be listing your website in the credits, and on that people can find links to the nonprofit as well.
Yeah, they can find links to the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, and I have lots of free resources, research publications, videos, exercises, my TED Talk. You could take the self-compassion test, a lot of stuff on there. It's a good starting place.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I'll also share your TED Talk as well. Well, thank you so much, and I look forward to experiencing more people in the world practicing self-compassion. I mean, that's where it starts. Have a great day. Aloha.
Aloha. Bye-bye.